Today, our fantastic panel are going to look at what they think the audience of the future might want or need, and we're going to discuss how the tech might help deliver on that. We'll frame that across a wide range of digital technologies, as well as a focus on immersive tech. Got a great lineup on stage, made up of mainly technologists and content producers. So firstly, let's hear a bit more about them and what they do. And since we're at the British Music Embassy, let's have some music.
Amazing 12 months.
And she cried. They took who that shot, but when they see me, no, no, God. Everything was home.
Delightful song.
Never be us. You and I. Perfect return.
Right, spotlighting these artists.
We're all stumbling through the night. It doesn't matter. We're all together. I know we can.
Just be overwhelming.
Rory, do you want to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Rory Connolly. I'm digital editor for BBC Music at the BBC. I work on that, most of that in some way, so generally in terms of what the BBC does, to me, music in a digital space, so whether that's our kind of coverage of events like you saw, some of our live music things that aren't at festivals, what we do around music for playlists and how we interact with some of the streaming services, what we do in terms of music news and some of our written content, but also then how we kind of cover music from a TV point of view and short form and stuff. And in terms of audiences, you know, we're the BBC, so we pride ourselves on thinking about the audience first, and particularly our audience in Britain, but also our audience around the world.
Oh, thank you. Okay, next up, BBC. Say a few words.
Morning. So my name is Matt Rivera. I'm the digital lead for Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. What you saw there doesn't look like Meet the Press, and there's a reason for that. We do a lot of work, as you would expect for a broadcast, of trying to make sure that we have a presence on digital platforms. But more than that, we spend a lot of time and pride ourselves on extending what it means to be Meet the Press outside of a linear broadcast. So that was a project that we launched last year called the Meet the Press Film Festival that we produced in collaboration with AFI, the American Film Institute. It was a way to expand the sort of core idea of what a long-form politics and policy discussion would look like if you were to reinvent it today. We can talk more about that later on, but basically what we did was we found 16 films from across the country, all short-form documentary, and we're able to bring them together as a way to sort of celebrate who we are, what kind of storytelling we want to really bring a spotlight to.
Well, thank you. Right, next up is Dimitri. Now, he hasn't got a video, and the reason he hasn't got a video is he doesn't need one, because he's from Teslasuit. I'll let him introduce himself, and you might notice that I'm wearing somewhat of a different garb to most people on the panel. So, Dimitri, do you want to talk us through that, and please don't hurt me?
Hi, my name is Dimitri Mikhalchuk, and I'm heading the project called Teslasuit. I'm sort of going around the world and evangelizing on the fact that VR only starts when the entire body is immersed. and when we can actually interact with digital worlds in a natural way with our own motions and actually see the other users doing the same, read their body languages, and so on and so forth. So we came up with this solution, which is called Teslasuit. It's a full body haptic suit with motion capture and climate control that's capable of transmitting the heat and cold, the exact sensations over the entire body. It tracks the motion, and now we're toying with the idea that because it's a platform that can be built upon, we want to include the biometrical system feedback, so to collect the data and actually make the VR worlds react to the user's mood and what the person is going through and experiencing. Thanks.
Okay, cheers. So yeah, he's controlling this suit. We had a bit of a laugh earlier that if he doesn't like the questions, he's going to zap me. If he does, yes, like that. And it's a bad idea. And if he does like the questions, he's going to give you a nice warm feeling, apparently. Well, more of that later. Okay, so next we have.
Our mission is to remove the barriers between people and technology using the original interface, the human hand. We live in a time where technology is becoming increasingly interactive. Leap Motion lets you reach out and interact with the digital world just as you would in the real world.
I think this is totally profound. Just having no limits on what you can experience. It's going to change the way virtual reality works.
I love how it was just more connected than it has ever felt in a virtual experience.
I can see it becoming the de facto because it's so intuitive.
This is something that everyone else needs to do.
If you'd like to say a few words.
Hi, I'm Barrett Fox, and I'm an interaction engineer at Leap. I'm working at the top of Leap's tech stack, which consists of a sensor and tracking algorithms and a software SDK. And I work at the top of the stack where we're exploring the nitty-gritty interactions of, now that you have your hands, what can you do with them? And a month before I joined Leap, like 4 years ago, I was telling my wife, I need to get away from the monitor and start using more of my body to think. I might be a little bit smarter if I could use more of me to think. And then I met Leap a month later and threw all in with them to explore that nitty-gritty moment of actually being able to affect what you're involved with. And it's been a joyful 3.5 years.
Nice.
Hello everybody, my name is Dan Tucker. I'm the exec producer and curator of a program called Alternate Realities, which is an immersive and interactive program within the Sheffield International Documentary Festival, which is the biggest non-fiction festival in the UK. It's our 25th edition this year. We showcase immersive and interactive documentaries across multiple platforms, so whether it be virtual reality or augmented reality or games or web documentaries, audio installations. And this year we have an exhibition for 6 days in June in the town of Sheffield, which is a great town. And then we have a UK tour and a Latin American tour following after. So we're a great place for artists and broadcast companies and other media companies to come and showcase work. But we're also really interested in the experienced audience, first and foremost. The exhibition is at the heart of what I do, and we're really interested in how we can profoundly affect the minds and emotions. This one's going, I think. People who come to visit the exhibition.
Okay, great. There you go. That is a fantastic lineup, I think. You agree? If we start off with at home, so this is by way of introduction to the kind of connected home and what we do in the sofa and interact with the content we all make. This is the Pizza Hut pie tops, which I love. So the left foot button orders your pizza, and they're about to release a new version which the right foot button pauses live TV when the pizza arrives. Genius. So from a point of view of the connected home and that kind of scenario, what do you think, which tech has got the best chance of breaking through into mainstream in the next 5 years? Is there anything that you guys think is going to be more ubiquitous than we see at the minute? Any takers for that one?
Well, Sony has quietly sold a couple of million PSVRs, and while that's not the numbers of an iPhone, there is an audience forming quickly for VR.
Anybody else interested in that?
I'm not sure. Is that? That's working. So I think the stuff that is able to record your personal data and use it in profound ways is the stuff that's going to have the most meaning. So we see that already we're really into measuring our footsteps, looking at our sleep cycles, looking after ourselves through health apps. So I think when you can combine that data into the Internet of Things so that we can either eat more intelligently or behave in a way in our homes that's going to benefit our health, I think that's the thing that's going to get the most take up. And I really like the idea of pizza shoes. But I can't see, just can't see that working at all. But I can see something where when I'm going through a period of my life when I want to be vegetarian, or I want to think about calories, or I want to think about my own health, I can see that working really well, and having a conversation with my fridge, or making sure that my screen time is better. The pizza shoes, a little bit doubtful. Sorry, Pizza Hut, if you're here.
Philistine. Rory, what about you? You want to talk maybe about the BBC Voices projects, the Alexa, and that kind of connected home, perhaps, have you?
Yeah, well, I think for us, a lot of what we do is around radio and audio, and the uptake in voice devices is staggering. So a lot of what we're doing at the BBC at the moment is trying to think about what our place is in that, and obviously we have a long history of being storytellers and people who are a trusted news source and whatnot. So we're looking at how we can interact in that space and what kind of content we can make specifically for that. So our voice team at the moment are working on a couple of kind of concepts around how we can interact with children in a really safe space using voice device, and how they could have some nice sort of conversational type experiences with voice devices. From a music point of view, we're looking at how that can make a sort of lean back kind of music experience really kind of interesting to you, and how you can take away the effort but give you all the kind of joy of making those music decisions. I think it's really interesting to start thinking about how as these new technologies come along, they start to interact with kind of publishing brands and broadcasting brands like ours, and you start to see those connections of the technology with people who are trying to make sense of them for a kind of a world where they're telling stories.
Gotcha. If we move forward to sort of, this is kind of a world exclusive in a way. So this is a Sizzler tape from a company in Northern Ireland called Stellify Media, who work with Sony. And the reason I want to show it is it demonstrates how these suits can work in an entertainment environment. So for the UK audience, you'll know what Crystal Maze is. I don't even know. Is Crystal Maze a US thing as well? Probably not. So the best way to describe it is Crystal Maze with VR, and I'll let play the video and then we can chat about it afterwards, because there are connotations with this for interacting with the audience at home as well.
Ninja! Through the fruit!
So yeah, that was filmed actually in the same building as the Digital Catapult Lab in Belfast, and we worked on with it. And Dimitri can maybe chat a bit more about maybe how that came about and some of the interesting experiences you had, and the colourful suits. Can I have a kind of a purple one, please?
Yeah, I have it here.
Come on.
Yeah, we've done this special project with Sony, building this VR experience. It was quite an interesting way of applying the smart wearables and showcasing what including the body will mean for the people. We tried to simulate basically, as you could see, there's spiders and different beasts and lava, going through lava, and how people would forget about that they're getting the feedback from their clothing, but rather be immersed in the experience. They would completely not notice where it was coming from, but they would completely, entirely believe that they see the spiders crawling on, stashing their arms, and that was a very interesting experience to build.
Okay, because not the holy grail, but that kind of interaction between what's happening on the screen, what's happening on your sofa, it's difficult one to crack, and the BBC have tried it to a degree, but this particular project they're looking at again, so that how can they get, I don't know how it's going to work, but how would you get that onto the sofa? But what about if we look at location-based entertainment, which flips that, a lot of success in the States and in Asia now with location-based entertainment like The Void, things like that, where the barriers to entry is cheaper, people can go communally and enjoy an experience, and that gets them into VR. What's the panel's feeling on location-based entertainment, and is it a fad or is it here to stay?
As someone who runs a big public exhibition and is going to tour that exhibition, I definitely believe in it. So, I mean, I think that the adoption of VR at home is on the up, and it's great. You know, the points about Sony PlayStation are right. That is the creeper that's becoming more and more pervasive. But for most people, the experience of really compelling VR is in a location-based scenario. And I think for the next 2 to 3 years, that's great news. That's great news for the medium, because it will give time for the medium to grow. It means people will have really profound experiences together. And there's, the narratives that we hear about VR that I find frustrating, that, it's very isolating, and no one has access, and, everything's a barrier, but actually, a lot of location-based entertainment that uses VR does that so well and brings people together, gives them profound experiences. I mean, I'm signing up for that white room immediately. That looks rad. I definitely want to have a go on that. And I love The Void, and I really like the idea of, more experiential kind of mainstream experiences. But as someone who has more of a kind of gallery experience which showcases the more artistic side of VR, I really hope that there's room for that too, that people will be able to choose between the more kind of big commercial experiences like the Void, but will also be really interested in something like alternate realities or other free festivals in which we're showing the more kind of out there VR.
So from your point of view, are you seeing any sort of shifts in the maturity of the VR work that's landing in Sheffield Dock? And you're seeing massive proper deals, Spheres at Sundance with a 7-figure investment. Is that indicative of the landscape, or is that a one-off?
I don't think it's a one-off. I think my bag is like non-fiction documentary VR, and I think that's a really exciting field right now. Like, some of the work that's coming out of that field is so profound, and some of it's been shown here. Just a handful of experiences like Notes on Blindness, The Last Goodbye. These are such powerful and really important experiences that take you into the minds and or bodies of others, that educate you and that generate feelings of empathy that have a real purpose and a reason. So yeah, the maturity of the work, every year we're seeing more and more complex pieces. With greater maturity, we're now seeing more of a kind of parity with film and television in terms of the cost it costs to make these projects, which then means that you need equivalent licensing or distribution deals. And I think that, in Sundance we saw Eliza Vitnit's triptych Spheres, which is here, I think, and we saw that picked up for like $1.6 or $1.7 million. I can't remember exactly what the figure is. But that's great news. That's great news for the community. It's great news, particularly for that team who are incredibly talented. It's such an amazing team. And I hope to see that more and more. Festivals like mine, we run marketplaces for that purpose. We want, the Wides, the Dogwoods, the MK2s, who are at the beginning of this licensing VR journey to continue. But then we want to bring in the bigger distributors, of course.
That should follow on another question about how important are brands and iconic culture references in helping mass adoption. Westworld here, the Ready Player One. Is that just a cop-out? Do we need independence up there with them, or is it great to see people obviously thinking loving the Star Wars, Ghostbusters stuff, or is that just gimmicks?
It's absolutely great to see them. It's great. It's just making sure, I think there's an audience for both, and that the funding doesn't just navigate towards companion pieces. That's the only fear I have, I think. It's like, well, if you're attached to an existing brand, then that's going to equal success. But actually, the number of people that are going to see these experiences, touring a companion piece for the Avengers movie is a lot more complex than perhaps touring something like Notes on Blindness, which would go to a number of different venues and cultural institutions. And what we haven't really talked about is cultural institutions in terms of VR. I really think that's a massive growing market in this point already.
Let's go ahead, Barrett.
There's two parallel threads with the evolution of this medium that fascinate me. One is the empathy engine that you mentioned. I'm seeing a lot of journalism VR projects that are exploring VR as an empathy engine. And on that thread, when America saw dead bodies on the beach of Normandy in photographs, this was a pretty historic moment to see dead Americans on a beach, and it was done through photographs in a newspaper. And it affected the American zeitgeist, and yet we now see dead bodies on the news often, and our cultural empathy does evolve. So I'm fascinated to see how that evolves. That's one thread that's fascinating. The other thread that's fascinating is I went to a lot of awesome arcades in the 80s and played an amazing array of innovative, inventive games, track balls and just centipedes and defenders and all of those sorts of things. And we went away from the arcades and we evolved into the consoles, and we went away from the social location-based and we went to the isolation. Now, VR has a big wild card in that, in shared virtual reality and multi-user virtual reality that is likely to change things. But those two threads are just fascinating to watch in the evolution.
Okay, well, actually on that, let's talk a bit more about your work, Barrett, and we'll bring up some of this stuff here. What we're going to do is, this is some of Leap Motion's and Barrett's work. I'm going to play a couple of slides and videos while he talks. But around that, I'm just curious to know, how do you choose which movements to work on? The integration behaviors you talk about, and they're very specialized and nuanced. You use terms like thrown, nudged, swatted, smooshed, and poked. So, how does that process start, and what influences that? So I'll just play a couple of stuff, and you can.
Sure. To your question, Nigel, here's an interaction that where we explored some. When we get AR layers over everything, there's going to be icons over the venues that you want to walk to. There's going to be annotations around buildings, and they're going to be at world scale. They're not at your scale. So at Leap Motion, we built an interaction engine that really went into the deep mathematical and physics-based heuristics of grabbing. And we made the ability to grab with your hands. But what happens if you can't reach stuff with your hands? I think, to your point, Nigel, was in this case we wanted to explore, what if you can't reach it? What are the ways in which you can bring it to you? What are the ways that you can select something by pointing at it, select it by grabbing it, and bring it to you in a visceral way? And in the case of this use case, this scaffolding, this is another thing where we're thinking about AR and VR simultaneously. Some of our customers said, okay, cool, we can grab things and we can place them, but it's kind of bouncy and they kind of fall over. And how would we start to stack things with a little precision? And we see an enormous array of AR use cases where people are putting things on their coffee table and placing things in their virtual environment around them. But what happens if you want to be a little more intentional about that? What happens if you need a little structure? What happens if you want something on your coffee table that's really aligned to it, or you want to stack things in an intuitive way? This is us just doing humble experiments, earnest experiments about let's explore that granular piece of the interaction. And we found that all of the details of the way things glow when you approach them, the way they react when you grab them, all of these visual affordances were really, really critical path to getting the interaction to start to make sense. And each of the new interactions that we explore, like my partner Martin Schubert and I, we do interaction sprints at Leap, where we pick a little granular area and start to explore. Each of those bubbles up all of these interesting affordances that they prompt us to do. When you mouse over a box in Windows, it blinks and you get a mouse over. But the analogy to that in VR is so much richer. Like, oh, you're mousing over this object, and is it reacting to you? How close are you? Which direction are you approaching it from? And this was a more a kind of a free-form investigation of, like, how do we make a sculpture that just reacts to you, and how do you adjust colors in VR? There's new ways to do that, and how do you rotate things? And each of these buttons and sliders that we did was a chance to do a new type of sculpture that reacts to your presence. And the takeaway from all of this that we've been really at Leap is that we need to respect the user. When they're in this VR environment, they feel very disoriented because it's so foreign and new. They feel like a 5-year-old. And the more the environment can react to them, the more it respects them. And the more the environment and everything that they can see can respond to their presence, the more they feel empowered and engaged. And that reactivity is kind of the one, I won't manifesto here because it's way too early for that, but that's the one thing where we're finding we keep coming back to is make it as reactive as possible, make it respond and respect the user.
Excellent. We talked a bit about brands as well and tie-ins with IP. Is there anybody that you guys are thinking of working with, or anybody you'd personally like to work with, and you've seen some of this and think, wow, that'd be a great use case for A, B, or C?
Yes, many, and I don't have
But none you can talk about, is that what you're trying to say?
don't have that answer, Nigel.
It's all right. No, just like the way sometimes you work with stuff and you think, wow, I would love to use that in a certain scenario. Yeah, no problems. So Dimitri, I mean, a lot of people have, especially me, I've cottoned on to the kind of novelty factor of electric shock, but what are the range of use cases you're seeing, and are there any that you haven't planned for that customers are asking you for, and where do you see this piece of tech going? How could it be integrated into the audience in the future?
Yeah, well, so far we've explored the electrical side of things. Many companies had seen it for administering the punishment in VR or for making mistakes and so on and so forth. But the range is so broad that we've already started working on the rehabilitation side of things. A few examples include putting people through VR experiences of various phobias and trying to pull them out on time and actually make them learn faster that the phobia isn't something they need to be afraid of. The other side that we've explored is I've just recently met with Paraplegic Society. It turns out that the whole life of paraplegics is a massive routine. They need to exercise, even though they can't feel, for example, the lower part of their bodies. They still need to exercise those muscles not to be drying up. So they have to go through these machines. They do the routine on a daily basis to keep the joints mobile, not to break so they don't dry and break. And we talked about that in VR. If they had some sort of clothing that could help them exercise, the whole thing becomes gamified and more interesting, less boring, and it's going to be more streamlined. So Teslasuit just slid into that model really well, because we do trousers and jackets, and so it's easy to put on and then use that for a daily stimulation routine. And on top of that, you get your feedback on how well you've performed. So say yesterday you've done only so much, today you want to go further. You can see that through visuals in VR or AR, but at the same time you get enough data to help you move on and do more about your own health. And so health applications is very big for that.
Excellent. So sliding the idea of your domain and politicians, I can think of lots of ideas for politicians wearing suits being zapped, especially if you link it up to a lie detector. Is that a step too far for Meet the Press?
Probably, yeah. But it's interesting that your first idea about how to use it would be not audience-based, right? But rather, so take a step back for a second. Meet the Press, if you're honest about it, is basically a radio show, right? It's a radio show that's on camera. It's the oldest broadcast in the world. There's no television show that's still on the air today that has been on for longer than Meet the Press, right? So the concept of what you do with it, so at its core, right, is it's an interview show, right? It's a panel discussion and an interview show alternating back and forth. It never would have occurred to me to put it on the politician, but I'd love to see what they do with it. But we're sort of thinking about it more from the perspective of what happens, how can our audience get something new out of the technology, right? So Barrett was talking about how to use lead motion. I mean, the reality is, we were just talking about this beforehand, it would be interesting to see if there's a way to extend the interview historically over time as an interactive experience through this kind of environment. Is that a helpful way to understand policy? I mean, so the reason I ask it that way is because the details of the discussion, the editorial content itself is so core to who we are, right? Core to what we're trying to do. That we have to look for ways to take every new technology, and obviously a lot of them are more simple platforms than this, less experiential, and apply that frame of, what is this telling me about politics, policy, the American voter, the success of any of those things, how they're interacting with each other. So this stuff is kind of hard for us. The live experience, the group experience, that's more natural. That's a more natural fit for us, right? It's a more natural place for us to say, okay, we can do the journalism, and we can bring our audience to a place outside of the studio in Washington, which obviously is the bulk of where our program takes place. And a lot of NBC News has done that, right? That's sort of a thing that we've been exploring. There was a big push around the 2016 election for that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention about, is there still an appetite for 360 video? I saw quite a lot of 360 video on campaign trails, AR data on, big billboards. You must have probably come across quite a lot of clever uses of maybe that sort of tech on the campaign trails, or is that fair to say, or is it still just a guy on stage with a microphone trying to speak to an audience?
Right, so that's the problem, right? So like most campaign events, by and large, are designed for viewing on a flat plane, right? They're television events, they're radio events. Like a political convention is a thing where you all stand in one direction and look in that direction, right? So we did some of that at the Democratic and Republican conventions in 2016. We have our small team that we do, and we sort of internally try to say 360 video to clarify that it's not virtual reality, it is reality, right? We're just seeing it in a different way. And you got some good experience from it, but it didn't sort of satisfy that itch of, it satisfied the itch of what does it look like on the ground? What is this experience like? And you can imagine how at a news event that's unfolding, that would be really helpful. But sort of the traditional pageantry of a campaign, that's quite difficult because it's so staged in such a way that you're looking at it.
Right. Okay, good. Rory, is there demand, you think, for your audience to attend inverted commas live events in VR from their own home, and how sort of mature is that? And I know the BBC has its own R&D VR lab now, but is music a priority for that, do you think?
I think we've kind of covered some of the complexities of that already. Actually, it is about that. Where does your experience happen? And I don't think we've really, as much as people have tried to tell us over the years that guy sitting at home on his sofa wants to dive into a VR experience of an event, I'm still not convinced that the best way to watch Ed Sheeran headline in a major festival isn't using the amazing director and the other millions of other cameras we have on it. So really, I think the opportunity is around those experiences. It's about making those decisions around experiences. Are you choosing to stay at home and watch something in the comfort of your home, or are you choosing to go with a group of friends to a space where you can get an enhanced experience? I think there's where the opportunity is. Can you create, like we were saying, an experience situation where you can step into a different world and embrace a different part of that festival experience using technology like VR or AR? For me, that's where the opportunity is, and the exciting thing around music. In terms of the team at the BBC, we're not speaking directly about music at the moment, although, one of the advantages of what I do is I work on big moments in the year that, millions of people around the UK watch, so that's when these opportunities often come up.
Okay. You think, we talked about VR, but you think VR is kind of lost out already to AR? And in the race to win the crown of immersive technology, there's a lot of talk about AR versus VR. Anybody got any strong opinions on that?
I think all of the signs are pointing that that's going to be a malleable gradient.
Good phrase.
I think the gradient between full immersive VR and layered AR. There's many flavors and mixes in between, and the MR right in the middle. And we're going to see devices that can bring you from full immersive VR and open up and overlay those things over the world like a curtain. We're going to see devices that let you put things on things physically, put your virtual on things physically. So we'll see a big gradient of that ongoing.
I completely agree about being able to mix the realities. That's coming quite soon. But let's just not write things off when it's so early. You hear people say, well, 360 is dead, it's all about CGI VR. No, people are still making amazing things in 360, and it is a powerful creative tool brush for capturing what's going on in the world around us, and sometimes mediating on reality. There is an element of 360 that can be virtual reality, I'd argue. And then this kind of AR will be more pervasive, and it's certainly more accessible, but there's no reason why that should kind of triumph over VR. I think that's definitely not the case. Just quickly about your point you were asking about before with music, I just wanted to say that I think most of the VR experiences I've seen, that are music VR experiences, aren't really that good. And maybe I just haven't seen enough. There is a piece here that's showing at South by Southwest called Beethoven's Fifth, which I think is really good and combines good directorial crafting and technique, but also has a purpose of moving you around the experience of an orchestra and an overarching kind of meta-narrative. And that I think is what's needed with music performance. You need some kind of narrative to wrap the user into, otherwise it becomes not as good as being at the gig.
It's also worth, like, the point of it being early is so important, right? Because if you think about it, what we have been able to accomplish with, let's say, just television, right? Like, a production of the Super Bowl is probably the most complex television event that you can imagine, right? The number of people, the live aspect, the number of views, the ability to bring all that information together, that is an incredible human achievement. And that is only the result of having the technology in hand for decades and decades and decades, right? And the notion that VR is going to be fully there at its infancy, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah. The one I've been quite impressed with is Live-like. Have you seen that? Which is the Science and Deals with Fox Sports over here, I think. And it kind of puts you in like a VIP box as if you're with the headset on and you're seeing the big jumbo screen. But then again, it's mainly for Samsung Gear VR and the sort of that kind of mobile VR. You kind of tap and it gives you different camera angles. You know, those guys talk about your production effort thing is quite right. They rock up to a stadium, have to connect into the existing production systems, and then they project it. But what it does quite well is it actually allows you to have 4 or 5 friends to watch the same match with their avatars there next to you. At half time, you can go into the lounge, watch old matches. And it's the first one I've seen where the production value is there and the interaction is there, and I think they're making a big play on betting as well. So you're all sitting there in your individual houses, individual avatars, betting on the game, and live stats come up. So yeah, I've tried it once or twice, but I don't know how it would hold up bandwidth-wise if you know, big matches and stuff. But yeah, you're right, it's still quite early, but that one is, I can see pretty much a lot of use cases for that one.
You know, on the journalism thread, it's fascinating to see CNN put up the Situation Room for Wolf Blitzer, where he gets to interact in a 2D medium. He gets to interact with virtual environments. But I think that's kind of like seeing Tom Cruise in Minority Report. Like, that's cool, when do we get it? And I think that if you're looking to allow the user to have more situational awareness, to have a perspective that is bespoke to their choices, think of them having the Situation Room and being able to grasp the map and see what's happening in Syria or in real time, or see what's going on in Times Square when New Year's Day is happening, these sorts of things. Combining that with the news is an interesting thread to let people interact with it in a visceral way.
Cool. We're kind of coming to near the end. I thought it'd be quite nice maybe to have a couple of questions. If there are any questions from the audience for the panel, if you stick your hand up. I need to put my glasses up so you can see. Any glasses? Hey, okay. Do you want to shout?
I will try and shout. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Barrett, you talked a lot about using our hands. One of the things I'm interested in is how can you multiply that with the sense of touch, and what kind of subtleties can you get away with? Maybe I'm not talking about physical things. And is that something that Leap Motion is thinking about in the future, perhaps? Not necessarily things like happy gloves, but somewhere in the middle, and maybe you can talk about it.
You know, there's several companies that are exploring combining Leap Motion input with haptics, and you know, Leap Motion is trying to solve the hard problem of seeing your hands without the need of external things, so the barrier to entry is as low as possible. That said, you know, Dimitri can talk a lot more intelligently about haptics than I can, one anecdotal experience that I had was that when we really dialed in buttons on a certain project and then we did user testing, we dialed in the buttons to like say, how much did they travel? What kind of sound did they give you? What kind of visual glow and travel did that button have? And when we really got detailed in our user test, people kept saying like, I felt that. And the 20th time it happened, you couldn't ignore it anymore. It's like there is some sort of synesthesia that's possible. I can't give you the empirical way in how it's done, but I've been calling it Haptics or faux haptics. But that's a fascinating territory of when people say that they felt that.
A quick follow-up question, just on your research point. One of the biggest challenges that a lot of people talk about is trying to advise you testers, because VR is also novel, but also experience people experience it differently. How do you tackle that issue?
We've had hundreds of people through the door in tests over the years, and going out to Craigslist and screening for that. Like, have you used VR? And we do look for people that haven't, and run the gamut there of trying to find people that had no exposure to it.
I think what Luke means is he wants to travel out to LEAP to be a tester. Is that right? Yeah. The question. I'll come back to you.
What about audification or sound in the LEAP motion? Is that something that is it possible, or is that something you're thinking about?
Yes, we think about it a lot, and you know, in the experiences that I showed you, we've been working on sound as part of the affordance. And when I talk about affordances, audio is a really, really critical piece to just communicate the user and give them a breadcrumb trail about what really they're doing, how close are they to this, and have they touched it, have they interacted with it. But it's kind of like audio in an animated film. You know, it's a whole nother layer, and it's a whole nother part of the craft, and you know, we're just using old techniques there.
I got one question over here.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in the title you've chosen, Audience of the Future, partly because the UK Research Councils, we're going to run a big program with the same title, funding projects, and I guess the question is about the audience, because if you're an interaction designer, you're not talking about audiences normally, you're talking about users. If you're a hardware manufacturer, you're talking about consumers, and there seems to be, I think do you not think there's a problem that we need to pull out what's unique when we talk about an audience, and that audiences need to be entertained? So can we make progress in the content rather than wait for the technology to enable? Because the history of the growth of film, growth of television, is that content innovation dragged through technology innovation, not the other way around.
I mean, yeah, we need more and more mature and better content to be showcased to wider audiences. That is the future. Because the tech is great, the tech is fantastic, but we need to have really compelling story. And we also need to think about the spaces in which people experience that story. So we need a compelling narrative in the space. So if you come to see an exhibition, or you come to a venue where you're going to engage with an amazing interactive or immersive experience, like for example, in the Tate Modern right now, there's a Modigliani VR piece. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, get that. No, I get you to start. There's an amazing Modigliani piece, and the narrative around that and the way in which it's shaped and formed with the exhibition as well makes an incredible experience. So, I mean, I hope for audiences of the future that they get the excitement that we as kids had at the arcade, that we as kids had when we went to the adventure playground, and that we as kids had when we first went to an exhibition with our parents. Kind of combining those three different narrative spaces as well as the great content. You know, you're right, you have to have powerful, compelling content to make any of this work.
And I think that, like, the challenge is about breadth, you know, and how you get to a kind of a mainstream space. You know, so much of so much what we do at the BBC is look like, in terms of innovation, of can we be first at doing something, or at least first in the UK, or can we do something that reaches a massive audience? And it's how you take some of these technologies to the next stage there now, because the moment of being first is kind of gone for a lot of it, unless you're, we're putting a load of people in Dimitri's suit. But how can we make something that feels mass to an audience, that feels like everyone is actually, as we try so hard to do, pull everyone around one singular moment and make them feel connected that way? That's the challenge.
It's also maybe as equally difficult a problem to solve as the technology, right? Like we learned the lesson of don't treat these new technologies as a dumping ground for excessive things you're already doing or extra things you're already doing, right? You have to have a smart new idea that's appropriate to that particular format, that platform. We spend a ton of time thinking about where our audience is and where they are in different times of the week and the day. I mean, we're a Sunday broadcast, so we know where they are on Sunday mornings, but the rest of the week, we're trying to track where they're watching and figure out from there, okay, how are they watching, where are they physically? It's not, we have our blinders that are our editorial sort of guidelines, right? So there are things that make sense for us and things that don't make sense for us, but in sort of the larger sense, this goes back to why I think the most exciting thing is the group experience, because yes, there is a use case, and again, I'm referring to our Sunday morning audience where people are sitting on their couches, right? It's part of their routine for this kind of the content that we produce. But if the goal is storytelling and reporting and journalism, it feels like the right answer to that is more like an updated version of a movie theater, right? It feels like a physical space. I don't mean the structure of a movie theater like this, but like the group event, right? That you're going in some kind of experience, some kind of group way, because otherwise, I just, again, I'm thinking about policy discussions. So they're hard, they're abstract.
Okay, I think we have time just for one more.
Hey, my question was related to the inclusive design of whatever you're doing at this point, right? So there are people who are handicapped who might not be able to use their hands, but then there are multiple companies who are coming up with prosthetic limbs, prosthetic hands. And I was wondering, like Dimitri mentioned, that there are use cases of whatever he was talking about. Are you also looking at some of these health case uses where you have prosthetic hands and then they're getting trained in these virtual reality environments so that they can work better?
Yeah, I've done some collaborating with a great company called Lighthouse, spelled Lighhthaus, and they've created a spectacular application for exploring children's heart defects, where you get a really visceral sense of what those defects look like. And they're also exploring ways to train people on medical issues with the Leap Motion and doing experiential training. I think that there's a whole bunch of companies that are exploring VR medical uses. That's a vertical that's adopting early and adopting with use cases that are pretty well tailored to the medium. If you take the situation of a parent who has just been told their child's going to have a life-threatening operation, and a doctor speak to them about where the hole in the heart is and how they will patch that. Instead, they can go into VR, go into the model of the heart and see the model of their child's heart and see the hole that has to be patched up, or the valve that needs to be replaced, and directly see it and own it. You got to imagine that for parents in this life-threatening situation, that information is really vital to their mental well-being, versus the really alienating language that doctors can typically use about something that complicated.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming here today. It was very interesting chatting to you. Thank you guys very much for coming along to listen. there are some details if you want to keep this conversation going. Do follow us, please, and love to hear your thoughts. And please do stay around for the AA panel. It's starting around 1 o'clock, and there is food and Irish coffee over there. Thank you very much.